After that fiery showdown in the Oval Office with President Zelensky last week, it seems President Donald Trump has lost his patience. Overnight, decided to temporarily halt US military aid to Ukraine, saying they needed to find out if it was contributing to a solution.
In response, Downing Street this morning have said that Britain remains committed to lasting peace in Ukraine. And after Keir Starmer told the Commons yesterday he'd be willing to put British troops on the ground to help end the war.
So what does that mean? Do we have the numbers to put boots on the ground in Ukraine? Are we beginning to have a conversation this morning about reintroducing national service or conscription? Would you want your children fighting in Ukraine? Conservative MP, former Army Captain Iain Duncan Smith thinks there are many benefits of joining the Army. Veteran Simon Weston, the most seriously injured survivor of the Falklands, says he would be very concerned if his children were forced to go to war. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Iain Duncan Smith, as Ed said just a moment ago, it is extraordinary that we are even having this conversation. You've just returned from the front line in Ukraine.
I have, yeah. No, I support a charity there that feeds dispossessed people on the front line, and I have to tell you, being there is a big difference on a camera because the damage that is wrought is astonishing. I mean, I was at a children's hospital. The Russians had targeted it deliberately because it was a ballistic missile hit. No warning at all, and just so many people are killed. The whole place is destroyed. They do this all the time. They target hospitals. They target residential areas. This is not accidental. It's quite deliberate. And the reality is that, you know, the war is awful.
Right, so would you want... You have four children.
I do, indeed.
2 girls, 2 boys. Would you want them to, therefore, defend children's hospitals in Ukraine?
Well, nobody wants your children to go to war, first of all. But if they came to me and said they felt that they needed to or they should, I would support them in that. I think that's important. I joined the Army for lots of reasons. It wasn't just about, you know, going to war. It was about camaraderie, learning about leadership, all these things that are important. And lots of children from difficult backgrounds gain hugely when they're in the military. So there are the byproducts of this. But going to war, I think the debate about conscription, that this isn't going to happen, OK? We're not ourselves under threat. So this is about a volunteer army if the UK decides to put boots on the ground. And it was there, supposedly, as peacekeepers, not to fight the war, but to be there as a guard of whatever agreement would be made.
Iain, I mean, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Latvia, all do have forms of conscription.
National service,
Do you think it is possible, if America is withdrawing its support and we're taking the Putin threat seriously, and there has to be boots on the ground, as Keir Starmer said, is it possible for the UK to do its bit with just the professional army and the territorial army? Or could it be, in the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that we start to have to talk about whether we have to start to get our young people into the armed forces, maybe through some form of conscription or national service?
Well, first of all, they've always had national service. Most countries in Europe, as you know, have national service. We used to have national service. It wasn't a British thing, but we did after the Second World War. And many look back on national service. Malaya was fought with national service soldiers by the British.
But that was compulsory.
Yeah, it was. It was national service, and they were sent out there to fight it. Yeah. Some quite amusing books were written about it. But the reality was that that was an aberration. The fact is, we are and have historically been a volunteer military. So British people have signed up to the Army or the Navy as volunteers. Only during the Second World War and latter time in the First World War did we ever have conscription. So I don't think that's the debate. The question is, I think, would you support them if they wanted to do it? And my view is, for all the polling, British people recognise when things are threatened and when they need to step up, and I don't think that would...
So you would support your children if they wanted to?
If they came to say to me, yes.
Simon Weston, what would you say? You also have children, similar ages. What would your response be?
I agree completely with Iain in the fact that you support your children with whatever decisions they make and take. And he's quite eloquently stated that there's a great difference between volunteering and conscription. The opportunities that conscription provide you are negligible. Unless it's writing a book about Malaya, well, that's a different story altogether. But at the end of the day, if people volunteer, and Iain has said quite rightly that we all join for our different reasons, and I certainly did, and many of my friends did. But this is all about possibly boots on the ground. That's a photo of me in Northern Ireland outside a sanger, what they called a sanger, which was a sort of sentry box made out of concrete. But yes, look, the whole thing about peacekeeping is totally different to prosecuting a war. And hopefully we don't do that. But we don't have the numbers for us to be solidly involved in prosecuting a war against a nation of 120 million people. Iain knows the mathematics on how many people you need to take on a huge army. If you're going to take them on, you need 3 to 4 to 1 to try and think you're going to win. And that would entail us being involved with the whole of Europe and possibly even hoping the Americans would come in. But what we're seeing from Mr. Trump right now is, well, we could have gone down, this is right out of his playbook, in the way that he's now forcing people to do what he wants by withdrawing this support. He's done it with the American government about how they're going to fund the American government. So, this is nothing that wasn't predicted, and I'm not anything if I'm not cynical about politicians. It's amazing how Mr. Macron and Mr. Starmer are both leading this whole thing about Europe having to step up to the plate, especially as they're the last two free European leaders who've been over to America to discuss things with him. I'm not cynical at all, and that's probably why I'm so loath to agree that I would want my children. Iain doesn't want his children to go to war, neither do I. But when you see how service people have been treated or not treated correctly over the last 40, nearly 43 years for us from the Falklands, there have been so many holes in the way that you get treated when you come back, and certainly when you're involved in the armed forces. So, at this moment in time, there's an awful lot that needs to be cleared up. But, we could have predicted Mr. Trump right now.
Simon, just as we sort of bring this to an end, do you find it chilling that we are even discussing the possibility of national service and conscription? As you said, you would support your children if that was a choice they made. Who wouldn't support their child, even if they didn't want them to do it? But can you see a point where, with not enough troops, we're talking about a form of compulsion?
We've been discussing it for many years. It was only several weeks ago people were talking about this. But what we've got to realise is that if there is a unified effort to police after the war, because I can't see us getting involved with boots on the ground and prosecuting this conflict. If there ever was the case, I don't think so, because we're not at that stage yet. I think we would probably see all the other European nations have to take their burden as well. So, I'm not overly concerned right now, but it is something that you don't want to see happen for anybody's family, whether they be Norwegian, Finnish or whatever.
Thank you so much, Simon. Just, Iain, while you're here, you were in the House of Commons yesterday.
I was indeed.
Very united mood across all parties, pretty much all parties, certainly the main parties in Parliament, supporting what the Prime Minister was doing at the weekend. Do you think that will last?
Yeah, I do. I think the recognition now in politics is that we are now facing the single biggest challenge to us since the ending of the Cold War. The democracies are really under threat at the moment. I mean, you've got the rise and the power of China going on, and their threats over places like Taiwan, the South China Seas. They saw their navy surrounding Australia the other day to make a point. And Russia with this brutal war, and I say brutal. Neither of us, or any of us, could have possibly thought that we'd see another full-scale war in Europe. That's what we were promised. The end of the Cold War meant war was over. No, it's not. The totalitarian states are back. And what we're seeing right now is one country in a nascent democracy, not perfect by any means, Ukraine, fighting for its very life for freedom and for the things that we believe in. And, you know, in the House of Commons, we debate, you know, tough sometimes, but it's about freedom, it's about free speech. And they're going to lose all of that if Russia gets its way. And that's what's really under threat. And I think that's what has united us completely. And I support Keir Starmer 100%. I think he's done exactly the right thing. The UK's role is to bind America back into NATO. It's hard, it's tough, particularly with the present president. But I give a lot of credit to Keir Starmer, and it's peculiar for a Conservative to say that, but I do, because that's his role and the role of every Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Good to see you this morning.
Very good to see
Thank you. And interesting also to find out about your work in Ukraine as well, Iain Duncan Smith and Simon Weston. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's a really important discussion.